All right, then we might start now. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name's Ali Goodwin. I'm a Senior Project Officer with the Aboriginal Culture and Practice team in the Office of the Senior Practitioner with DCJ. Welcome so much to this Lunch and Learn research seminar, which is titled Growing Up Strong, Findings from Footprints in Time, the Longitudinal Study of Indigenous Children. Before we begin, I'd really like to acknowledge that wherever we are joining from today's webinar, we are all living and working on Aboriginal land. I would like to personally acknowledge the Galari people of the Wiradjuri Nation, who are the owners and First Nations people of the area where I have the privilege of joining from today. I would like to pay my respects to all First Nation elders, past and present, and to future and emerging leaders. And I'd like to extend that respect to all of our Aboriginal colleagues that are joining us today. I would like to warmly welcome all webinar participants that we have. We have had over 1,200 people register from a broad range of organisations, universities, departments. Just shows what a great topic of interest that this is to many, many people. Today we're going to be talking about the footprints in time, which is the longitudinal study of Indigenous children. This study has been following the development of over 1,700 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children throughout Australia since 2008. The study provides rich insights into what helps Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children grow up strong, from their early years through to adolescence. Today, Acting Professor Stuart Ekberg and Tirritpa Ritchie from Flinders University, together with Professor Kristin Laurens from Queensland University of Technology, will share key findings from this study. They will explain how Indigenous storying methods have been adapted to bring the data to life, guided by strengths, approach and Indigenous conceptions of social and emotional wellbeing. Following the presentation, we'll have a panel of experts who will be able to discuss the policy and practice implications for these findings. And at the end of the session, we'll have a short question and answer section, if time permits. Please ensure that you have any questions for the speakers that they're put into the chat box during the presentation, because I'll be able to come to those at the end. At this time, I'd like to introduce our presenters and panel members for this afternoon. Firstly, Stuart Ekberg. Stuart is descended from the Western Arrernte people of Central Australia and migrants from Britain, Germany and Sweden. He is an Associate Professor in the College of Nursing and Health Sciences at Flinders University. He uses social science methods to investigate experience of health and healthcare. Recent projects including evaluating a clinical yarning intervention for pain specialists, developing a communication training intervention for community mental health care, and investigating early childhood experiences using the longitudinal study of Indigenous children. Welcome, Stuart. Tirritpa Ritchie. Tirritpa Ritchie is a Kaurna man and father of two. His career spans multiple public service roles across education, social services, corrections, and paediatric occupational therapy throughout South Australia. He has worked as a lecturer delivering Aboriginal health curriculum and as a researcher in Aboriginal health with a focus on adolescent health and wellbeing. Welcome, Tirritpa. Kristin Laurens. Kristin is a researcher of European heritage who trained in Western quantitative methods in Australia and overseas. She's a professor in the School of Psychology and Counselling at Queensland University of Technology. Kristin often works with large longitudinal data to inform policies and practices that foster mental health and wellbeing among children and young people. Recent examples including working with data from the longitudinal study of Indigenous children, the New South Wales Child Development Study, and the London Child Health and Development Study. Stevie Kirby. Stevie is a Nimpa Wallowa man from Brewarrina in New South Wales, living and working on the lands of the Gumbaynggirr people. He has worked in the child protection system since 2002 and was a substantive caseworker manager on the Mid-North Coast. He is currently a Senior Project Officer with the Aboriginal Culture and Practice Unit. Welcome, Stevie. Kelly Ramsden. Kelly Ramsden is an Aboriginal woman who now lives and works on Darug land in the Blue Mountains. Kelly has worked in child protection for over 27 years, holding various roles in New South Wales Health and Department of Communities and Justice. Kelly is a strong advocate for Aboriginal children and families across the state. Having previously held operational roles, she is currently a manager in the Child Safety and Wellbeing team, transforming Aboriginal outcomes, and is supporting implementation of the Aboriginal Child and Family Advocacy Program, the establishment of the Aboriginal Community Consultation Mechanisms, and Stolen Generation Organisations work with Department of Communities and Justice. Welcome. Anthony Shannon. Anthony has held various roles across 20 years with New South Wales Communities and Justice and currently is Director of Early Intervention and Inclusion. Anthony leads child protection early intervention policy and programs, the New South Wales Volunteering Strategy and New South Wales Carers Strategy. Welcome, Anthony. So, thank you so much. I'd like to now invite Tirritpa, if you'd like to go ahead with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ali. Cheers. Thank you for inviting us to share some of the work that we've been doing with the longitudinal study of Indigenous children. My name is Ritchie. I'm a Ghana man, occupational therapist, lecturer and researcher at Flinders University. We wanted to share some of the work that we've been doing through storying and helping to understand what it is that helps Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children grow up strong. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge, Stuart, can we stand that last slide? To acknowledge country and do this by changing languages here to the language of the Ghana peoples of the Adelaide Plains, where I'm located today. Nakanida nanari Tirritpa kunaicha, natu dampati impariti, yarta yacha, yaklandaya yumanandaya. And just acknowledging country and the various countries in which we're all located today, and acknowledging Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peoples, and also acknowledging the important work of the family and the children represented in the work today. Now, let's change slides now, Stuart. We're a multidisciplinary team led by Rotary woman Jess Rogers and with Kristin Laurens, who's joining us today. Our co-research team includes Western Arundel man Stuart Ekberg, myself, Kate Williams, Donna Berthelsen, Emma Carpendale and Lauren Piltz. We're fortunate to have worked with Western Arundel artist Kylie Montiglione to further highlight this work in the report. Let's get to the next slide. Thank you for the overview as well, Ali, for this. To give you a brief snapshot of the longitudinal study of Indigenous children, with an emphasis on the components in which we're focusing on today. As you mentioned, Ali, the study includes over 1,700 children and covers 11 areas of Australia and has over 14 years of available data from 2008 to 2021. There's still more years being collected and research being collected and released, and that will have multiple accompanying reports and publications with it as well, which you can find as well. We can see across this that over time, children and families have moved throughout the study, and we see the diversity in geographic locations and experiences represented, which highlights the complexities in these stories that we're seeing today. Let's go to the next slide, Stuart. I wanted to highlight the important work of the community-based researchers and the research administration officers, or the RAOs, who collect this data with families and communities and have ongoing relationships that we are fortunate to be able to do this work as a result. The study is designed to understand what Aboriginal children, Torres Strait Islander children, need to grow up strong, and is governed by a steering committee with majority Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander members, and leadership which highlights the importance of good Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander governance as well. Let's go to the next slide. We wanted to share some images from the report with a QR code link so you can access it as well. We have the report and 3 accompanying fact sheets which nicely summarize the report as well. And within the report, you can see in greater detail what we're discussing today. And you can also see the work by Kylie Montiglione, which is highlighted in the presented slides as well. So we know from previous research that one of the major reasons that families participate in this longitudinal study is because it allows them to tell their story and their narrative. We wanted to honour this by finding ways to let families tell their stories. And we did this by adapting existing storing methods to make them suitable for use with longitudinal data. By treating data as footprints here, we made a journey through life. We were able to use this data to tell stories about these life journeys. The QR code at the top here is a link to a previous presentation that we gave about storying with longitudinal data, which can go into that aspect of it into a little bit more greater depth and detail. If you'd like to know more, that's a really good place to start. Let's go to the next slide, and I'll hand it over here to you, Stuart.
Thanks, Tirritpa. We wanted to give an example of some of the things that we could tell with the stories that we've been able to generate using the longitudinal data. Stories like this one here. Of course, what you're going to see is in these stories is that there are differences across study children and the stories that and their stories, but there are also similarities. So here, for example, in Layla's story, we can see, that she lives in a remote part of Australia, and although her country isn't near, she visits as a baby, creating a link to her people and country. By the time she starts school, she's learning about culture by yarning through stories and speaking language of her mob. In contrast, Alira's story is about a girl living in a large city far away from the Torres Strait. When Alira's young, she is building connections to culture through school and community groups, and her dad is taking her to shows and exhibitions about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. So although there are differences between these stories, there are also some really important high-level similarities. And one of the things that told us was that we could start to look for how those high-level similarities may play out quantitatively in the data that we've collected. So this highlights to us that the storying approach that we've adopted here as an Aboriginal way of knowing, being and doing is both making and remaking meaning. This is consistent with what people like Phillips and Bunda have written about storying methods, who describe stories as an analytical process. So when we story with data, like we have in this study here, we're selecting bits of information, we're interpreting those bits of information, we're invoking things like theories in this case about social and emotional well-being, and we're ultimately crafting these into stories that make meaning. And the important thing about that meaning is that once we understand it, we can use that to guide other forms of analysis. And for this study, the way we've been doing that is by taking those stories and then helping them to tell us how we should do other things, like conduct quantitative analysis. And I'm going to hand over to Kristin now to talk about how we approach doing that in this study.
Thanks, Stuart. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristin Laurens, and I'm joining you today from QUT on the lands of the Turrbal and Yuggera peoples. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and to those of the lands you joined from today. And may I also pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have joined us. I'm a non-Indigenous Australian, and I was trained in Western quantitative research methods. So I really valued the opportunity to work together with Tirritpa and Stuart and our other team members to bring those methods together with Indigenous methodologies that foreground Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of being, knowing and doing. And as we worked together, we purposefully used the themes that emerged from the stories that Tirritpa and Stuart were generating to guide the quantitative analyses in our report. And this was our way of translating the experiences shared by the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander children and families into findings that can be used by policymakers, practitioners such as yourselves, and community organisations in helping kids grow up strongly right from their early years. So our team yarned regularly about grounding our work in strength-based approaches that have been developed by and with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And one of these was Gian Dudgeon's model of social and emotional well-being, which holistically represents well-being as connections in 7 areas of life: body and behaviour, mind and emotions, family and kinship, community, culture, country, ancestors and spirituality. Now in LSIC, there's lots of information available about most of these areas of connection, but for our analyses, we had less information about connection to culture, country, ancestors and spirituality. So those we combined into one area together, leaving us with 5 total areas of connection in our model. So Stuart, next slide, please. Now, to create a quantitative measure that reflected this holistic understanding of wellbeing, we counted up the number of these areas of connection up to that total of 5 that the kids experienced. And in this slide, we represent these connections as the number of circles, so that at the bottom of the slide, you can see that many of the kids experience connection in all 5 areas. So about 4 in 10 during middle childhood and almost 5 in 10 during adolescence. And there was another large proportion of kids who experienced connections on 4 out of 5 of the areas, about 3 in 10 in each of those periods. And at the very top of the slide, there's a much smaller proportion of kids, about 1 in 10, that had just 2 or fewer areas of connection. So using this information, we were able to conduct analyses to show the early childhood experiences that were associated with strong, holistic social and emotional well-being in middle childhood and adolescence. In other words, we're looking at which early experiences were associated with having all 5 or 4 out of those 5 areas connected relative to just having 1 or 2 areas of connection. Next slide, please, Stuart. So guided by the stories that Stuart and Tirritpa generated about kids' experiences of growing up strongly, we identified a range of early experiences to examine in our report in relation to the later outcomes for kids during middle childhood and adolescence, including social and emotional wellbeing. Now, these early experiences were from the first 5 years of life before kids commenced formal schooling, and also from the first 2 years after kids started at primary school. Much of the information was provided by the child's primary caregiver, typically their mum, with additional information gained from another carer, typically dad, as well as from the kids' teachers at school. And as children grow, more information became available directly from the kids themselves. So I'm going to hand over to Stuart, who's got the job of taking you through a selection of some of the key findings from our report, including how kids' experiences depended on where they lived.
Thanks, Kristin. So as Kristin was just saying, one of the key areas that we looked at in our analysis was how children's experiences were affected or might be affected by the place in which they lived. And this, one of the key findings of our report was that where children live can ultimately shape their experiences. As we'll see in some of the high-level results that we'll present to you shortly, some of the experiences that we looked at, some of the positive experiences were more common in the remotest areas of Australia, and others in urban areas of Australia. This matters, and knowing this matters because we can now understand the importance of recognising difference and diversity amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. And for those of us that are interested in promoting social and emotional wellbeing and academic achievement and growing up strong for our kids, we need to now be prepared to adopt place-based approaches that respond to those differences. An example of this is listening to stories of culture and understanding how connection to culture is really important. In the storying work that Tirritpa and I did, we heard stories of kids like Ty, who from the time was a baby, his mum knew that to grow up strong, he'll need to not just understand his culture, but also use it. When Kristin and our other colleagues looked at this quantitatively, we could see that kids that, like Ty, most kids in the longitudinal study were connected in some way to culture before school through a different range of practices like participating in cultural events, learning arts or dance, and engaging in activities like hunting. But what we saw, and what we'll continue to see across many of the findings that we'll present here, is that this varied by location, and it varied following a fairly consistent pattern. So this kind of connection was most strong in very remote areas of Australia. It still remains strong in relation to culture, connection to culture in major cities, but as you can see, it has dropped away a bit relative to remote and very remote areas of Australia. This connection to culture is important, and our findings show why it's important. Kids who participate in cultural activities during early childhood were found to have significantly more likely to have strong social and emotional well-being during both their middle childhood and their adolescence. Now, it's important to clarify that currently available data from the longitudinal study stops at adolescence. Those kids are still being tracked, so in the future we'll be able to see whether it also has an impact into early adulthood. But based on current evidence, we can see that connection to culture is important not just in early childhood, but it has benefits through into middle childhood and adolescence. This matters because we need to create opportunities for cultural connection, specifically for children, or especially for children who may not have regular access to that culture. These opportunities may be particularly needed in larger cities where we've seen that connection to culture may not be available to all kids. We hear similar stories and see a similar pattern in relation to connection to mob. So we hear stories like the story about Sam, who has strong connections through his extended family network. They all contribute to growing his understanding of language and culture as he spends time with them learning through singing and dancing. Before school, most kids in the longitudinal study identify with at least one mob, and the way that's measured in the longitudinal study is whether they identify with at least one nation or language group. But again, we can see how this varies by location. It's most common in remote areas of Australia and least common in major cities. In comparison to connection to culture, here we see in major cities, connection to mob during early childhood is only present for 1/2 of kids living in major cities. This connection is important because it is associated with stronger social and emotional well-being in early childhood itself, but also then into middle childhood and adolescence. This matters because we need to support connection to mob, especially for kids affected by circumstances like family separation and intergenerational trauma, not least the ongoing impacts of stolen generations. This may be especially important for children living off-country who are more physically removed from many members of mob. We can enable this through focusing on areas like early childhood learning centres, schools and community organisations, and helping them to build connection with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to foster that connection to mob. We see something very similar again in relation to connection to country. We hear stories like those of Sophie, who lives in a city with her mum. She's not born near to country, but her mum takes her to visit when she's old enough. Most kids in the longitudinal study have some connection to country during their early childhood, but again, it varies by location, following the kind of trend that we've already been seeing in relation to connection to mob and connection to culture. Again, this is important because it's associated with stronger social and emotional well-being in middle childhood and adolescence. This matters because we need to promote more opportunities to share stories of country with kids so that they can build that connection to country, especially if they're living off country and particularly if they're living in cities where we know that connection isn't always there. One way this might happen is through supporting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to create more resources that build this connection to country, whether that's through media like books, videos, performances and exhibitions. We see a very similar pattern again in relation to connection to language, albeit in this case the frequency of that connection is considerably lower. We hear stories like Tegan, who's surrounded by her mob's language as a little kid, using it for singing, yarning, dancing, drawing and playing. We know from the results of the longitudinal study that by the first 2 years of school, about a third of kids in the longitudinal study speak an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander language, but this varies dramatically by location. It's particularly common in very remote parts of Australia, but outside of those very remote parts of Australia, kids are not likely to speak an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander language, particularly in major cities and inner regional areas. In addition to this, we see a concerning downward trend in relation to connection to language over time. So amongst the 18% of kids who are speaking language in early childhood, 60% of those kids are still speaking it in middle childhood, but unfortunately this is dropping away to 46% in adolescence. So we can see that that adolescent period is a critical period of loss in relation to connection to language, and organisations like high schools have a really critical role to play in trying to preserve that connection to language and keep it strong. This is important again because speaking language during early childhood is associated with stronger social and emotional well-being in both middle childhood and adolescence. This matters because reviving, revitalising and keeping language strong is not just important to preserve the unique linguistic diversity that we have here in Australia, although that certainly is a reason that it's important, but it's also important from a public health perspective. When kids have connection to language, it is associated with them having stronger social and emotional well-being. We see a very similar thing again in relation to connection to family and kinship. We hear it in the stories about kids like Logan, whose mum recognises the importance of strong sense of family and community in Aboriginal culture, and that large network that helps kids like Logan grow up strong. We see that large network in the data that Kristin and our colleagues have analysed. We can see, for example, that the most common source of support parents report in the longitudinal study is from family who are living outside of the house. So that extended kinship network is critically important. Overall, half of parents in our study, or approximately half, report they can draw on some level of support from family and friends to help them during their child's early childhood. The kids of parents who had this support were more likely to be able to better manage their emotions and learning at school, be more engaged at school, achieve higher results, and have stronger social and emotional well-being. Parents with stronger well-being during their kids' early childhood period were observed to spend more time doing home learning activities with their kids. They felt more confident, or were reported feeling more confident with their parenting. They showed more warmth and care and reported using less harsh discipline. Parental wellbeing also had really positive outcomes for kids themselves. It was associated with improved overall health, better learning, higher school engagement, fewer social and emotional difficulties, and lower overall distress. Many children in the longitudinal study were able to attend playgroups before starting school, and just over half attended a formal preschool program in the year before school. But again, we see that this varied by location, and in this case, the trend is opposite to what we've been seeing so far in the report. So it's more likely for kids to get access to playgroups and preschools in major cities than it is in, say, very remote parts of Australia. This is important because our analyses show that playgroups set kids up for being more organised, independent and eager to learn, the thing shown in the pink circle here on our slide. And this in turn supports stronger school engagement once kids get there. Attending playgroup is also associated with stronger parental support. And as we've already heard from the previous findings that I've presented, that's good for kids too. Once kids get to school, close teacher-student relationships and lower teacher-student conflict is really important for stronger school engagement. So they need to be priorities in that transition period from early childhood into early schooling. We also conducted some more complex analyses to show pathways between early childhood learning experiences and thinking skills into middle childhood and adolescence. So as the box on the left shows, there are early childhood experiences that are associated with a range of strengths that emerge, and these emergent strengths are the boxes in the middle. And those emergent strengths in the middle then lead to stronger outcomes both in primary school and in high school. So getting things right in early childhood is setting kids up for success all the way through into high school. These findings show us important ways of bolstering children's experiences during early childhood to promote later learning success, including equitable access to playgroups and preschools, and bolstering parental support networks. And this is especially important in remote areas of Australia where access is currently not equitable relative to other parts of Australia. So to summarise the key results of that we've presented to you today, we have shown across a range of different experiences that diversity matters. If we're going to take seriously promoting the social and emotional wellbeing and academic success and overall strength of our kids, we need to recognise that there is diversity amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. Because of this, place-based approaches need to be considered. We need to promote cultural connection for our kids, especially those kids living in the cities where that isn't always available. We need to support connection to mob, especially in contexts where there's family separation, intergenerational trauma, living off country. We need to dramatically accelerate connection to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages. And we need to do that not just to preserve our unique linguistic diversity, but we need to do it because of its public health benefits as well. And finally, we need to enhance early learning access, especially in parts of Australia where this currently isn't equitably available. Building on or reflecting these key insights that we have made using data available, we want to end with the voice of the study children themselves, because many of the things that we're talking about here relate to things that they regard as important for growing up strong. You can read more about this in the report that we've published, which is available through this QR code on the screen. We wanted to finish with some of the things that the kids themselves have told us through the longitudinal study about why they themselves want to grow up strong, arranged here as a poem by our Wiradjuri collaborator, Jessa Rogers. Being healthy, making good decisions, growing up healthy with a strong mind, good relationships, confident, independent and reliable, respect my elders and culture, being kind-hearted, helping people and looking after people, getting a good education, keep growing strong, being resilient and persistent, getting better at something. You've learned how to be a good person and be safe, strong and brave.
Ali, I think your mic is off.
Thank you. I just didn't realise it was off. Sorry. I just was going to the lovely comment in the massive gratitude to you all for the enormous effort in the work for sharing with us that's in this accessible way. So I can't describe how wonderful it was to hear that research. Thank you very much to the presenters. It really has given us a lot to think about, I think, in terms of how we design social and emotional wellbeing programs, that the support genuinely grounded in helping children grow up strong, whether they live remotely, regionally, or in urban areas. We've come now to the question and answer section. I'd just like to remind people that if you'd like to add questions to ask presenters or the panel, just do so in the chat and we can come to those at the end. It's really valuable to pair research with lived experience. And so now I'd like to hear from the panel to unpack some of these insights a bit further. We're going to start with Stevie Kirby today. Steve, I'm going to ask you a question if you'd like to respond. Can you please reflect on the research findings and talk a little bit more about the importance of the connection to culture and family strengthening?
Thank you. Thank you, Ali. And thank you, team, for sharing your findings with us. That was absolutely amazing. I kind of reflecting on that, on the connection to culture and family strengthening, those pathways to developing stronger social emotional well-being for our children starts in the early years, as we know, through spoke about in the research around attending play groups prior to starting schools, but also those informal gatherings that MOB does. So MOB come together, and they have been for many generations: parents, uncles, aunties, cousins, brothers, sister cousins, and grandparents. Aboriginal people, this highlights that Aboriginal people have supported social and emotional well-being for our children for millennia. This was done through the true essence of connection and relationships guided by Indigenous kinship systems, which is embedded in Aboriginal people's way of life, whether in a contemporary sense, consciously or unconsciously. This is the point where culture is shared, the stories, the knowledge, the care, and this is where love is expressed as well. Nearly half the parents in this research reported they could access advice from family and from community in their children's early years before starting school, which supports strong classroom and emotional regulation skills in their early years of school, and high level school attendance as they move through the middle childhood years and adolescence, and showing that strong connection during those periods to their school community, their schools, their culture, their country. Also highlights around ancestors and a connection to our spirit world, mind and body. The importance of laying those early the research has shown the importance of laying the early foundations for strong emotional, social emotional well-being links children's strengths to early childhood experiences, supported by parents and MOB to ensure that children are participating in those cultural activities, a connection to country, speaking their MOB's language, which is really important. Stuart just highlighted that and reinforced it. Identifying with their MOB, connection to country, being on country, because when we consider being on country, it's just not being in a place. It's around thinking about those kinship systems and our relationships. Our relationships are not just relationships with people and places. It's a relationship with environment, our plants, our animals, our trees, our waterways, our ancestors, our spirit world. So those really important experiences for our babies around attending those cultural events, learning those traditional arts, paint, dance, song, engaging in those practices. Children and identifying with their mob, connecting to an actual place on country. I know I said it before, but children who speak that language, and it's highlighted in this research that it happens a lot more in remote and rural areas, using language and using it in context as they grow up. They certainly grow up a lot stronger and a lot connected to their people, to our people. Aboriginal groups and organisations thinking about Aboriginal community control, they're eager to ensure our children and are safe and protected, and more often than not would like to establish contact with those that they feel comfortable working with for both current and future issues. It's important that our presence is well known in community, as Aboriginal people prefer to engage with departmental and community representatives that they're comfortable and familiar with. When it comes to protecting our kids and supporting our kids to grow up strong in mind and body, Aboriginal community control organisations with targeted programs and links to community can support our families to support our kids to grow up strong in community. Ali, I'll just finish off with saying the part of the work we do across the child protection continuum and early intervention and prevention and restoration space out of home care, kinship mapping is extremely important, as highlighted in this study. We need to know who and where to go. The importance of connection and how disconnection is quite harmful. Maintaining and developing relationships for mob. Keeping children connected. Supporting parents and mob. Culture is safety and strength. Allow our mob to tell their stories and understand cultural protocol.
Thanks so much, Stevie. That was really fantastic, really thoughtful reflections. Your emphasis on culture and family really echoes what we've seen across the longitudinal study, so thanks very much. I've got a question now for Kelly. Reflecting on the findings, can you talk about the work your team does and how it relates to the findings in this research?
Thanks, Ali, and thank you, Tirritpa, Kristin and Stuart, for sharing your research today. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm calling in from Darug country and acknowledge elders here who continue to care for this country, its waterways, and all of us who reside here today. Some of the work that our team is doing is supporting the implementation of active efforts legislation. This changes to our child protection legislation were made in response to the Families Culture report and enacted in November 2023. Central to these changes is the requirement for DCJ to demonstrate active efforts to support children to remain safely with their families and on country. One of the key changes to the legislation is the requirement to ensure that we identify our child's culture early and build and support and build cultural connections. We want to ensure that we're supporting those connections on an ongoing basis throughout our work with families and children. Torres also leads work to support the Aboriginal Child and Family Centres. These centres acknowledge the importance of place-based initiatives. There are currently 9 Aboriginal Child Family Centres across the state, and we're looking to establish a further 6. These cultural hubs support early childhood development and facilitate learning through cultural activities and language programs. Aboriginal Child and Family Centres aim to improve school readiness and developmental outcomes and support families with culturally responsive services. They also look at strengthening cultural identity and belonging for children. Our team also does work with stolen generation organisations. These organisations provide and support advocacy for survivors and descendants of the stolen generations. these survivors continue to generously share their stories of resilience and courage, and their stories of being separated from their culture, country and families. And this provides all of us with significant learnings. We are also working with our partners, ABSEC, to develop ACCMs, which provide our caseworkers with opportunity to engage with local community members when we're working with children in the child protection system. So they are able to advocate and support families in those connections while they're working within our systems. Thanks, Ali.
Thank you, Kelly. That's really great. It's really important to hear how the findings connect to the work that's happening every day with the children and families that you work with. So thanks so much. Question for Anthony now. Reflecting on the findings, can you talk about the work that your team does and how it relates to the findings in this research?
Thanks, Ali, and thanks for the researchers for that presentation. That was wonderful. I'm coming to you from Biomedical country, and I too would like to acknowledge country and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. The work that the team I work in does is around managing the New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice Community and Family Support Program. It's DCJ's early support program, which delivers services all across New South Wales through a range of community-based organisations. I mean, this research is really critical in supporting, informing the policy and program approaches around improving socio-emotional wellbeing for children and young people, which is one of the important outcomes we're looking to deliver through the community and family support program. The work in this research around acknowledging the importance of connection to community, connection to culture, connection to language, and the lifelong benefits that has around improved socio-emotional outcomes for children and young people as they move through adolescence and into adulthood, I think is a really critical learning for us in our early support program. Something I think we can reflect more on and think about how we can kind of build that more into the program design, and also wherever possible, help build the evidence base around kind of what works in the early support kind of, space for Aboriginal community controlled organisations who we know, through our program deliver really good outcomes for children and young people and families. And the research, sometimes in that space hasn't, kept pace with, the wider kind of Western canon of research. So I think, studies like this are really important to help kind of continue to kind of build that evidence and kind of surface those really great outcomes we know are happening, particularly in communities and with Aboriginal community controlled organisations. I think the the work around the evidence base as well is important for us to enable Aboriginal community controlled organisations to help design and deliver services and programs that are that work best for their communities. And having access to research like this, again, I think kind of reinforces some of the good work that's already being done, but also I think creates a space for reflecting on, a wider kind of research piece that can help inform how some of that design work, can look a bit different, and particularly the focus on the kind of lifelong socio-emotional outcomes, I think is really important. Some of the work that happens in our program around supported play groups and supporting families, I think is really critical. And so, yeah, I think this research is important in that space for us to continue to kind of build into our program.
Thanks so much, Anthony. Your perspective on the early intervention and the system settings adds a really important layer, so thanks so much for that. We've got probably time just for one or two very quick questions before we move to the close of today. There's been a lot of questions in the chat about how the findings can influence policy direction and funding in the future, and I was just wondering if the panel might like to speak to that briefly.
I can probably speak just briefly from an early support program perspective. Increasing funding with Aboriginal community-controlled organisations is a priority for the Community and Family Support Program in DCJ. It's something that this program, along with its predecessor, the Targeted Early Intervention Program, have been working on for probably about 7 years, to be honest. And we've had some gradual increases in funding to ACOs, and whilst our funding is probably only sitting at around about 12% at the moment, we have seen a significant growth in the number of Aboriginal community-controlled organisations that are delivering support through the program. And so I think research like this helps reinforce our case for advocating for greater funding in that space.
Okay. Thank you so much, Anthony. One question came in and said, could you please speak a little more about what place-based approaches are? I'm not sure who the best person is to answer that, but you're on mute, I think, Kelly, sorry.
I can talk a little bit about that. I'm not across all of the detail of everything that's happening in our agency in relation to those place-based solutions, but certainly as an agency, there's a recognition that we need to ensure we are connecting and building mechanisms to support families across the state, whether they're in more remote areas or in urban or city areas. And that's one of the things that I think that the Aboriginal Child and Family Centres is aiming to do, is to have a network of places where families can go and connect and be provided with either cultural or other practical supports, and not have to go to a more generic service where it's run by the people who are actually from that place. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Kelly. I'd just like to end today by just asking each of the panel members just one of the final things that they would like to let the listeners know, to take home to think about. I might just begin with you, Kristin, if that's okay.
Sure, thanks. I was just reflecting on how important it is to listen to children, families and community about what they need to grow up strong. There is a wealth of knowledge out there, and we had the privilege of sharing some of the knowledge that those families shared with us, now with policymakers. So I think trusting community to know what they need, and knowing that while there were these common themes, that you have to tailor that to local communities, I think is my key take home from this work.
Lovely, thank you very much. Stevie.
My key take home, Ali, would be, I agree with Kristin, actually, deep listening is extremely important. One would be Aboriginal family-led decision making, so partnering with our Aboriginal families, walking alongside and having them be involved in and making decisions about their life and the life of their children.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks, Stevie. Anthony.
My key reflection, I think, or takeaway would probably be a bit like what Kirsten said. I think the lived experience kind of research alongside the kind of the outcomes, information that's available in this research, I think is something that's really important for policy makers and program delivers, and like in the area I work with, to continue to ensure we're listening to that evidence, because that lived experience is really important. So yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks, Anthony. Tirritpa.
Likewise, agree with what's been said, and particularly with Kristin speaking to the ways in which reflecting upon these stories and seeing the ways in which families share these knowledges and these experiences, and highlighting the importance of ways in which engaging with that by being led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledge is fantastic to kind of be involved in the process and to try and honour these lived experiences.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much. Kelly?
I I think that this research reflects the deep knowledge and understanding of Aboriginal peoples about the importance of the connections to country, mob, place, and culture. And I think it's incumbent on us all as practitioners or policy makers to keep that central to our thinking as we move forward.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Kelly. Stuart?
I can't say it better than Kelly, so I'll just try to say it a different way, which is, I think, as Kelly noted, yeah, it's critical to recognise these strengths. We often focus on challenges, and it's right for us to do so, but we also need to always be looking for, finding, and building on strength.
Certainly. Thank you very much. Look, I'd like to thank all of the presenters and the panel and everybody who joined us today. This longitudinal study gives us such clear guidance on how we can help children grow up strong through culture, family, learning and connection. Some additional links and materials relating to the webinar are listed on the Lunch and Learn website. And now moving on, FACSIAR would like to invite you to our next Lunch and Learn, which is to be held at 12 p.m. on the 19th of March. The topic will be prenatal substance exposure, supporting infants and families to improve outcomes. And I hope that you'll be able to join us again. For now, thanks so much everybody for the panel, and I hope that everybody has a lovely day. Thank you so much.